Hello, journaling friends. My name is Marissa, and this is Pages and Process. Welcome to Pages and Process today. Today is October 9th, 2021, and I am here with my little teapot, and I have my little teacup, and I'm going to enjoy a little tea, a little talk, do a little pages, and maybe a little process. I want to share a little bit kind of just about where I've been at, how things have been for me in this project, but also in some of the other projects I have, in case that's fun for you to hear, or in case you're a creative that is also working with different projects that you're developing, or you're just a person that has a lot of different ways and roles in which you show up in the world. And sometimes that can be either overwhelming or get a little hazy or confusing about where you begin and end, where your work begins and ends. a little like clink in the kitchen just happened. Oftentimes, little sounds like that go off. From my history of studying from a lot of different spiritual teachers and craftsmen that really connect to sort of interrelational dynamics with the world around us, that's usually a sign that, like, hey, pay attention to that, or hey, you're on the right track. Sometimes, depending on the sound, it can also be like, hey, be careful. Maybe don't go there. That felt like a light one to me. So I'll go ahead and carry forth as kind of a co-signing experience. So right now, my different projects are this one, Pages in Process, where I show up and it began by me needing some sort of outlet because during the pandemic, we have not had kind of the outwardly community connections that we had prior. And I was finding that in the isolation one, I really needed the downtime and the slowness, and to find myself and to feel like my own clarity of identity and boundary between me and the rest of the world and my communities. But I also was finding that, like, the experiences I was having with a couple of different therapists weren't really meeting my needs in the way other therapists who are no longer accessible to me because they're not working with they've shifted gears in a way where I no longer have access. I was finding that I was needing something, and some of the old spiritual teachers that I would go to regularly weren't seeing clients because of the pandemic, or they were, and I would touch in and out, and that was helpful, but there was like kind of something that was feeling like I needed more of. And what had happened for me over the course of the last many years now, I've been writing daily pages for about 8 years, I think, starting with Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. And that practice developed through that. But what had been coming up in my pages was, these aren't just for you, share them online. These aren't just for you, share them online. But I'd been like, no, Julia says, don't share your pages. They're private. They're just for you. So I felt like that wasn't something I should or could or would do, because I was very much like, rules are rules. And if I learned this thing in this way, I must continue to do this thing in this way, which for me has been an interesting journey, because I'm also very into improvisation, whether that is stream of consciousness writing, like we do in the writing practices, the writing sessions that I invite you into as a part of my Patreon, if you'd like to join me there, but also that I do in order to bring you these pages that I write and are meant for more than me. At least some of them are sometimes. And also as a dancer and an actor who enjoys being in that sort of liminal space of unknown that happens with improvisational activity. I cook improvisationally too, which anyone who doesn't use a recipe and just kind of like intuitively feels their way through a kitchen and gets a sense of what they do or don't like and what feels right or too much, and they like to work that way. To me, that's also working in that kind of improvisational space. So as I've been feeling into more of how I can breathe that improvisational dynamic, which I love so much, into the space of how I show up online, how I communicate during my different projects, pages in process. Marissa's Moon Magic, where I talk about the moon cycles, invite you into some readings and rituals, ritual practices, which feel really good to me. They're kind of more nature-based. They're cyclical as far as like how we look at our own sense of place in the world and how we return over and over in cycles through the moon cycles, but also through nature's cycles throughout the year with the seasons, etc. And then I have where this all sprung from, self-care for performers, which is mental wellness and body belonging for performing artists and creative community. And the thing with that project is that I have a lot of complex trauma associated with the performing arts and creative communities. And so showing up there to teach or lead or invite those into mental wellness and body belonging who either I have experienced pain from directly or who are running kind of like an undercurrent of wanting to be in the business of things in a way that feels resonant, like a resonant match to where I either used to be myself or have been healing from internally and also externally, and the way in which I show up in my relationships and what people are bringing into their dynamic with me. That's been hard. So I still do hope to find a way through with intentionally aligning there. In the meantime, as I branched off into Marissa's Moon Magic and Pages in Process, a lot of those performers are finding me in these two places, and I think that's so lovely. And that I feel really comfortable with. But coming back out into like specifically for self-care for like performers, what does that look like? How do I speak there? What does that mean? And maybe you have something like that in your own life where you're like, oh, I can talk to this person in this way, I can talk to this person in that way, but like when we're all together and we're around these other people, like all of a sudden I'm like, ah, it feels uncomfortable. I don't know if you relate to that. I'd love to hear if you do in the comments, but I think that's a pretty common human experience for us to feel comfortable and secure in certain kinds of dynamics or relationships or roles that we fit, whether that's with a best friend or a sister or a sibling or romantic partner. And then there's the rest of community or other kinds of dynamics that might include some challenging aspects that perhaps we have yet to gain either the resiliency, the tools and resources or perspective to be able to really stay grounded in ourselves and regulated and have those conversations without it being overly taxing on us. So I found that self-care for performers, something in my nervous system like freaks out a bit when I show up there as a grounding, regulating resource. It's like I feel like I have to bypass all of my experiences in order to be regulated and grounded, as opposed to listening to them and being like, hey, maybe you don't feel safe here. Oh, hey, maybe this is going on. Which is what I do here in Pages in Process. I'm like, hey, here's what's going on with me. Here's how I'm relating to you. For me, what I'm finding with Pages in Process is that the people who are liking and sharing and following my work here feel regulated to me. Like I feel safe interrelationally with them and with you, at least so far. And because you never know, well, you never know who is going to be wandering through the internet and find you and say something mean or nasty or take something you said to heart and then have an experience where they either lash out or project or have a legitimate complaint or concern that they need to be witnessed or spoken through. And so I think for me, Pages in Process is a lot about like recognizing where do I begin and my audience ends? Where do I begin and end? Where do the people who are interested in my work, whether that's listening to me online spout off about my pages and the process I'm in, or whether that's joining me for writing sessions and worksheets on Patreon. And how do I show up differently inside of my Patreon than I do out more in the YouTube land, versus on the Instagram land versus the Facebook land, because those lands are all they all have slightly different landscapes. So I've been working, I know a lot of creators will use the same content and cross post, and I do aspects of that, absolutely. But I think also it's important to get a sense of, they say in performing arts, you got to read the audience, you got to read the room, right? So I think of all of these different platforms as being kind of a different room to read. Um, hmm. Okay, so let's read my pages, shall we? Here we go. I got my little glasses on. These are my pages from today. What do you see, hear, and sense? What do you want, need, and desire? And those questions are questions I ask a lot in practice for intimacy building, whether it's with myself or whether it's with another, for a creative practice or for a healing process. I think those are always really interesting questions, helpful questions to ask ourselves, ask another, or ask the character that or the role in which we're being asked to show up into, and let that answer kind of autonomously, finding the autonomy of something. So what do you see, hear, sense? What do you want, need, desire? And I followed along with myself in a writing session today because I was doing the editing process, and I was like, I'm just going to take it. I'm going to make sure everything sounds and looks good, and I'm going to follow along, feel what it's like to receive. And that's what that was the kind of the prompt prior to getting in, as I was aligning ourselves to where we were at before diving into practice of writing. So here we go. I am finding my way. Mental clarity becomes more prominent as I continue utilizing my waking hours as a means of stepping into aligned activity. That dream space of my journaling, improv, and stream of consciousness expression or experience is becoming more of a current that I am connected to in a securely attached way. I trust in my relationship with flow, connection. So now the craft can come forward a bit more in the way I am in daily practice. Sometimes we need to be bolstered up. Sometimes we are stable and ready to explore and share more directly, more expansively, more expressively. This all feels fairly fluid to me as I continue to guide my way through the experience of my programming in a healthy way. We often hear programming in spiritual communities as like, you're programmed to do this, but also in arts administration, what we think of is like, especially in nonprofit orgs, is like, what's the programming? Like, what are the practices? What are the ways in which you show up to serve community? What are the programs that you offer? So I am sort of using that word relationally to be aware of that it has sort of different connotations depending on who's using it, how you're using it, why you're using it. There are really loud cars outside. I'm sorry if you can hear that. I'll read that again. This all feels fairly fluid to me as I continue to guide my way through the experience of my programming in a healthy way. It can be a source of ease and support to ritualize how we show up and with whom. You connect a great deal to the substance of your method, and seeing the process from a wider angle is helpful for perspective. The long way home feels like a nice opportunity to walk along a path with nature and being outdoors for longer. I both love my home and love my time exploring and breathing in the outside. For some kind of safety, I am getting more and more clear in my practices of showing up to the home I have been tending for myself, in my actual home and also my personhood, sense of home and who I am. I do wonder sometimes about the softness I seek. I love it so very much and can experience the potency of its healing powers, that softness. I long to linger a little bit in the air of soft sweetness. I love to feel the soft surrender of being in safe spaces. I recognize the ways I note and notice lack of safety at times with others, and I am learning to be aware of how I'm showing up in those moments of awareness. I think I always actually was aware, maybe not always. I have been often historically in my life aware of how I'm showing up in those moments, but not always, but often in a place of like fear and codependency of how am I showing up and am I showing up right? Now it's sort of like, how am I showing up? And do I want to show up that way? Do I need to show up either differently in relationship to make this a little easier? Or do I even not want to show up in relationship right now because it's too much, too soon, too fast, too complex, the more than I have to offer, and recognizing that. I allow my own care and comfort to provide a hand and offering of freedom to myself. The growth I have been developing and undergoing is transforming my experience of self-trust in situations and scenarios I previously wanted nothing to do with, and rightfully so. It's not healthy or helpful to let loose into the night without awareness of what's lurking in the trees. Becoming aware of the dangers in the woods and learning how to detect potential threat can be life-saving and serving. My homeward bound exists as the context of ritual and ceremony. These two ideas and how we can choose to step into them intentionally is a great way of finding orientation and direction in our lives. Meet me in the middle. Meet me in the middle, in the field between the woods, in the spacious glen, and fold the meadow flowers into the arms of your lover's heart and breathe them home. I like that. I want to read that again. Meet me in the middle, in the field between the woods, in the spacious glen, and fold the meadow flowers into the arms of your lover's heart and breathe them home. One more time for me. Meet me in the middle, in the field between the woods, in the spacious glen, and fold the meadow flowers into the arms of your lover's heart and breathe them home. There it is. Ooh, I like that process. Should we process those? How do you feel in your body now after that? The journey that you took with me and my journey that I went on in my writing practice. I feel grounded. I feel like effervescent or something. I feel like some sort of richness of breath. That richness of breath to me feels like a willingness to breathe into an area of my life or the way I'm showing up that feels like romantic to me. And romance doesn't necessarily have to mean sort of the more traditional like romantic partner and you find your love and um because oftentimes I think a lot of that romance is tied up into the aspect of our nervous system that's like, I'm not safe, I need something to keep me safe, and then you reach for it, and then that becomes an addictive practice and a coping strategy, as opposed to like feeling in the present moment, being with what is, being aware and alive and attuned to the magic of the experience. And then when it goes, allowing it to go without clinging, needing, wanting, grasping, trusting that your ability to have that kind of experience is your ability to have that kind of experience. And so there will be more experiences like that, regardless of whether it's with that particular process, practice, person, place. So that's a bit on romance for me today. Sometimes a lack of romance can actually be the most romantic thing. Sometimes letting go of what you think romance is or is supposed to be. Like if you can release it instead of gripping onto it, where you're like almost like that's like fighting the experience of romance or the person you're wanting that with, or the place that you are trying to get to in order to feel that way. And if we can let go of it, we can have the possibility of it landing in our hand for a moment and then leaving like a butterfly. We don't want to grip it, we'll damage the wings. Thank you for joining me today. And if you would like to join me for writing sessions, I would love to see you inside of my little Patreon, where I share weekly writing sessions and from time to time worksheets when that feels more aligned. Um, and It feels really nourishing to be in connection and community there, and to be able to take part in practice as I'm also leading and guiding through practice, I think has been a necessity in a way for me in order to feel like I'm not depleted in the process of my practice. And that's something I've been finding within that Patreon experience, which is great. If you'd like to follow along for more on the moon, Marissa's Moon Magic on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, I am there. If you're a performing artist and you want to vibe into more self-care, mental wellness, body belonging, I'm working out how how I can regulate myself to show up there more consistently. But that's self-care for performers at also YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, all of those things. And if you're curious to just stay in touch with the projects I do, I'm at Missy Harumi, MISSYHARUMI on Instagram. All right. Take care. Mwah.